Hi, Sea Ranch. My name is George Calys, and you're watching the Candidates Forum for candidates of the 2020 Sea Ranch Board. Thanks for watching us in this format online. As everyone well knows now, we're all sheltering at home. The Del Mar Center is not available as we normally have used it, and our three candidates have graciously agreed to work with this format. And we hope you understand, and we're going to just go ahead and proceed. So this is for the Sea Ranch Board. These are the three candidates. I'll introduce them quickly, and then I'll let them say something. There is David Skibbins. David, if not, wave your hand or something. There's David. Below him on my screen is Michael Kleeman. Michael. And Roland Stoughton. Am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
Stoughton.
Stoughton, Roland Stoughton. Okay, those are three candidates. And I'm George Calys. We'll take about an hour and talk about some issues that we hope will be useful to you. Why don't we start off with each of the candidates taking a minute or two to just tell us a bit about yourself and what you've been involved with here at Sea Ranch, and why you think you would be qualified to be on the board of directors. David, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. My name is David Skibbins, and it's great to be able to address all of you, even in this very odd format. It's the best we can do in these circumstances. I have served on the board for 3 years and hope to serve on it again. Before I tell you a little bit about me, there's one thing I want to say, which is I really urge you at this time, when you get the envelope from Sea Ranch, to vote. You have three excellent candidates, any one of which would make really great board members. But if we don't get enough votes, then we have to run this election again, and it's going to cost us $15,000 to do that. And it's going to cost you and I that money, because that money comes out of our dues. So I know there's a lot going on in your life, but please right now, or as soon as you get that envelope, open it up, make your votes, and mail it in so that we can make this election legitimate. I have been on the ranch for 50 years. My parents were some of the pioneer founders of the ranch. They moved in when they were just building the very beginning units of it. So I've grown up my whole adult life on this ranch. I've gone through marriages, divorces, births of my child, and now my grandchildren. And we get to walk the forest trails together. I obviously love the ranch and care incredibly deeply about it. It was such a privilege to serve on the board, and my whole relationship to the ranch shifted when I was serving on the board, because I think before then I would walk around and go, oh, what a beautiful place. I'm so grateful to be here. It's such a gift to have this in my life. But as a board member, I walked around feeling, no, this is my responsibility. It's not just a gift. It's much more than that. This is something that it's time in my life to give back to, because it's up to all of us on the board of directors to make sure this is working at an optimum level for the members, for the association, for the local community. And that's the kind of passion that I bring to this job. And I hope to serve for another 3 years and have that same feeling of walking the streets and going, yep, this is part of my job now. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Michael, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you want to be part of the board?
Thank you, George. First of all, this is a really hard time for all of us. And I think we need to acknowledge that events like this virus and events like the power shutoff make us uncomfortable and make us a little bit scared. And I hope that people have people nearby to help take care of them. And I know there are people on the ranch and elsewhere that if you need assistance, you should reach out. This is an event that we will weather. My life will get easier when it's done. I'm working 14-hour days with the Red Cross right now. And I just know that together as a community, a broader community, will be fine. real quickly, I've spent the last 25 years in service. I've been at the ranch now for around 34, full-time resident for around 5, and I've worked with a number of nonprofits and on several board positions. And I really believe that the ranch has an important legacy that needs to be renewed. And the founders, the people like David's parents and others that helped create this place did an amazing job. But the world's different, and I think it's now time to revisit what it means for a community like Sea Ranch to be here, especially at times when we have events like this virus, or when we have other issues that create the kinds of constraints that we've had to live with. And I think it's time to revisit that. I have a strong fiscal background. I've been a corporate executive and served on numerous nonprofit boards, almost all of them on the finance committee, and believe that I can bring a lot to it. I was part of the team that helped bring Sea Ranch Connect here, and have served on the planning committee and the utility committee of the board, and hope to continue that service at the board level.
Thank you, Michael. Roland, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you'd like to participate in the board.
Thanks, George. Roland Stoughton. First visited Sea Ranch as a young guy in 1982, and now my sons and granddaughter visit. I've been here full-time for 10 years above Shell Beach, right out there. My career has been primarily science with some business toward the end. I started out studying why galaxies have different shapes, and then slowly became more practically oriented. Later, my research was in the ocean warming detection field, and then several years after that, I was helping the US military figure out what the absolute physical limits were to its more fantastic research projects. And then after several years of that, I decided to go into the growing field of biotechnology. And so I ended up starting a few biotech companies. And that led to a string of publications which were kind of crazy, all over the map: astrophysics, geophysics, acoustics, molecular biology, biochemistry, and author of 30 US patents in biotech. But I think the most relevant experience for TSR's board probably came from the biotech companies, because they required finance, communication, management, planning. And of course, those startups also involved a lot of stress, and it was a great comfort during that period to have Sea Ranch picked out as the escape plan, and to think about that, you know, during the hard days. My community contributions here on the North Coast have been mostly through the arts, music and art. I served on the board at Gualala Arts and then took a turn as their president. And I've been active in music groups and visual art shows. I've also tutored math and physics students through Action Network, and I gave 2 lecture series in physics and biology through the Spindrift lecture series. I haven't yet served the Sea Ranch Association directly, and I'm running for board member now because I'd really like to contribute to the Sea Ranch more than I have. And I also sense that there's more than an average amount at stake, even aside from the current crisis. It's difficult at the moment to remember that there are other things, you know, besides the coronavirus, but this won't last forever, and we need to digest what we've learned about our community during this experience and get back to the business of maintaining and improving it. I think my underlying sentiments are not too different from the other 2 candidates about this place and its future. You know, I believe it's very well managed and efficiently run, but I have felt we could do more to try to encourage a robust full-time community and better connections between part-timers and full-timers. And these have been underlying questions for decades, and recent events have cast maybe a new and perhaps harsher light on them. And if we can all remind ourselves of how much we love it here and what the natural treasures really are, then I think group decision-making will be easier.
Thank you, Roland. We're going to move into a series of questions. Thank each of you candidates for giving us some background on yourselves. I'm going to do a series of questions here. We'll just rotate them around to the different candidates. Candidates, if you have a comment to make on what another candidate has said, hold that for a moment and I'll recognize you and you may offer an alternative comment or rebuttal if you wish, and we'll make sure everyone has time to do that. Michael, let's go back and start with you now on this one. This is a fairly open-ended question, and we'll start with some open-ended questions, and then we got some more specifics later on in our forum. I want to ask what you believe the most pressing issue facing the Sea Ranch and the board is at this time. Another way to think of that is what should be the priorities in the next year or two, and how would you begin to address those priorities? Michael?
Thank you. I think there's a couple of dimensions to the answer. One of the boards of directors have two core responsibilities under the law and also in principle, and they are fiscal management of the organization and also setting strategy for the organization that then the management and staff execute. And I think there is, the reality is that we need to actually and very aggressively rethink what are the priorities at Sea Ranch and what we need to think about, and then also how do we chart the proper economic course given the additional fiscal demands that we're going to be seeing in the coming years. We have been deferring some maintenance on roads and other things because we have to allocate resource for environmentally driven factors such as the dying trees, the replacement of some of the hedgerows that are just aging out. You know, they just don't last forever, sadly, although we think of most trees as living forever, and bluff erosion, et cetera. And we have an aging physical plant. We have a 50-year-old water system. And I think there's a number of things that we are fortunate to have and we take for granted their good operation, but these things need to be very carefully reviewed and refreshed. So that's part of it. And the other is, I think, an increased understanding within the community that there is a benefit to greater resilience and greater community self-reliance. And that takes intentionality and that takes investment of time and energy to build. So those would be the two main priorities. You know, how do we renew the Sea Ranch for the next 50 years, both in terms of its principles, but also its physical reality? And then how do we include the idea that we want to be able to be a community that can survive the kinds of shocks we've seen in the last year and still enjoy the benefits of being here?
Thanks, Michael. Roland, you want to tackle that one? I'll reiterate the question again for you. What's the most pressing issue or issues facing the Sea Ranch and the board at this time? What do you feel the priorities should be in the next year or two, and how would you address them?
I think the board had a near-term and has a near-term dilemma involving responsibility versus authority. You know, whatever the legal interpretation of the CC&Rs, the board and the community manager will feel a real responsibility for member safety. On the other hand, you've got county, state, and federal layers of government that have the real authority. And yeah, I think the board did what they could. They closed the facilities, they provided links to the county directives and reinforced them where necessary. They didn't go too far, which would have been, you know, sending security around to talk to every rental party that showed up, and they didn't go not far enough, which would have been remaining completely silent on the issue. In the intermediate term, you know, I think there's going to be a lot of fallout from what's happening today and will happen over the next few months, and you know, perhaps some damage control in just how we feel about each other. You know, that there's some friction, you know, clearly evident in the local email posts about vacation rentals versus full-time residents. And, you know, the intensity of that to me says that maybe there was more simmering than we thought even before the coronavirus crisis. So I think addressing that from an emotional and a community building standpoint before it goes on too long is a good idea. And then there's the issues of reopening facilities. You know, a lot of us rely on things like the swimming pool as core elements in our health. So having the pool closed is in itself a health risk for a lot of people here. So what are the strategies for making those decisions, and how can we, refine whatever the county says and interpret and act in the best way for everyone. And then in the 1 to 2 year time frame, I think, consolidating the lessons learned, back to business as usual, new projects, and what Michael said about reviewing the long-term plans. We'll need to come to some kind of accommodation about the vacation rentals. It may not be a big change, but something that makes everyone feel that they've been heard and we have a way to go forward. And I think most important is we need some kind of message and directive that we have internally and externally about what's the forward motion. And to me, it's always been toward a robust full-time community. Even if you're not here in that right now, you want to feel that the community as a whole has that forward motion. How do we reassert that?
Thank you, Roland. David, you want to take a stab at these questions?
There's a couple of things that occurred to me. One is, of course, we will be facing a recession. And as we weather this, looks like we're in for another at least 90 days of trying to deal with an economy that's been basically shut down. And then the repercussions of that is going to go for some time. And I think that's going to have a direct impact on our budget and on the kinds of decisions we have to make as an association in terms of being maximally fair to the employees, which are our lifeblood, and also making some hard decisions about future planning, immediate future planning and long-term future planning in terms of the next, I think, 2 to 3 years of instability economically. Another thing that comes up for me, and it's interesting that other folks didn't mention it, we are shifting our management of the community. And in this community, the position of community manager is crucial and very important. They are the voice of Sea Ranch, and the board, for the most part, up until now, has been a fairly behind the scenes, quiet support of that community manager. And that community manager, Frank, has been basically the one in front in getting the maximum amount of conflict from members, and also being the one to lay down the law when it's necessary and to interpret the law at other times when it's necessary. That is shifting, and we're going to have a new person come in. And I think one of the things I've enjoyed about listening to the other 2 candidates on this board is that they've all been talking about the values of this place. And we're going to have to inculcate this new director into what those values are, and how being a community manager here on the Sea Ranch is a whole different kettle of fish from any other position she might have been in. So I'm very much looking forward to her coming in and seeing what happens. But I'm also feeling like this is going to be a very proactive year for this board in terms of supporting her in the same way Frank's going to be supporting her, and not only bringing her up to speed, but bringing her into the philosophy and the deep values of this place. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Michael, would you care to respond to either of the other candidates? Any points that they brought up that you might want to elaborate on, or perhaps have a different point of view?
Just an expansion on something both David and Roland raised. Sea Ranch does not exist in isolation from the broader community we're part of. And understanding that we are fully interdependent with the entire coastal community going north at least 30 miles and south, I'm not sure how far we want to look at that, 10, 20 miles, and going east a bit, I think is really important. If Gualala does not survive as an economic hub, then Sea Ranch will atrophy. And I think really understanding and taking into account in our planning, not just for the near-term economic reality that'll be caused by the shutdowns, but we've watched Gualala atrophy over the last 30 years. I mean, when I first started coming up here, there were what, David, you've been around 10 restaurants in Gualala, all right? And we've watched it decline, and I'm hoping that we can, as a board, think about the community not defined by the boundaries of the Sea Ranch. We have some authority within the Sea Ranch, but I think shared planning and shared understanding of how we are economically and socially interdependent, I think is really, really important.
Thanks. Roland, do you want to offer any expansion or alternative ideas to anything the other two candidates have said?
Totally agree about the importance of establishing a good working relationship with the new community manager. That's something that is at the center. The board is important, but the community manager is really the hub, if there is one. And just the other comment would be to pile on to what Michael had said. When I first moved up here, I went up to Point Arena frequently to visit friends, and the place was a ghost town. 2 out of 3 of the storefronts on Main Street were boarded up. At night, it was actually spooky. Mm-hmm. And that was, at the depth of the Great Recession, basically. Things were just starting to turn around, and now Point Arena looks a lot better. But you can imagine that happening or worse, really good chance of it. So, what do we do to preserve our our whole lifeboat here? It's really important.
Yeah, thanks. David, anything you want to add?
Let's go on to the next question.
Okay, let's pivot a little bit here to an issue that a couple of you have alluded to, the short-term rentals here at the Sea Ranch. They've gotten a lot of attention. There's a lot of talk, and I believe the board or a task force may look at that. Tell me a little bit about what your thoughts are on short-term rentals. How should they be managed or not managed? What are the issues that have to be addressed? Roland, why don't you kick this off?
Yeah, I guess the first thing that came to my mind was my own experiences in the early 1980s. The family getting out of the rental car, going into the lodge and to Sea Ranch Escape, looking up at the big board with the flags on the lots, and the people in the office would recognize us, and they were members of the community, and they greeted us as if we were, at least temporary members of the community, even though we were just renting. And the houses had names, so each house was like its own dream. It was so magical, and I think that experience probably is lost, mostly lost with the internet-enabled, Vacasa, Airbnb, national or international, exposure. It's everywhere, it's nowhere. And I think, part of the solution needs to be restoring some kind of local understanding, focus. I hesitate to use the word control, but some kind of local attachment, for even if these platforms continue to be used so heavily going forward. They are brutally efficient. They're part of this, this flowering of technology and free markets, but they don't care about the individual communities that they are serving. And use dynamic pricing, like in the airlines, where you fill up every last seat to get the last few bucks. And so I think the solution won't be that hard, and I think a large part of it is being accepting of the other point of view, whatever you consider the other, to be. That rental owners have to recognize that, maybe absolutely optimizing revenue is not in everyone's long-term interest. It really is a different kind of land use, and full-timers have to recognize that almost every owner of rental property very much wants to be, a good member of the community, and so they also want to do what makes sense for everyone. Above all, I think we want rentals to attract future community members. For us, that really is as important a role as defraying some of the expenses of owning a second home. We want to maintain forward progress toward that robust community.
Yeah, David, let me follow up on that. So obviously there is a part of our community who own rental properties or investment properties, and in some cases rely on that income, and some of them enjoy their house and rent it out at other times. And yet at the same time, we're all aware of where there have been problems, what we colloquially refer to as the party houses, or the renters who maybe aren't really respectful of the land. And how do you see all this shaking out?
Well, this association is a group of cats, and herding them is always a real interesting process. I think that we have put in place a lot of the noise and disturbance rules that we enacted when I was on the board. I think are instrumental in sort of addressing a whole lot of the issues that have come up around the rental problem. To a degree, it's a matter of education, and to support the people who own rental property in learning how to educate the people that come into their houses about how being at Sea Ranch is a unique experience. To a degree, I think it's a matter of educating some of these larger structures like Vacasa and Airbnb, having the board or the community manager interact directly with people in charge there to get them more engaged in what we're trying to do here on the Sea Ranch, and possibly make them more supportive in terms of the way they list their properties and the way they present what it means to be a Sea Ranch rental. And to a degree, there's going to be messes every so often. There's going to be a fraternity that comes onto a beach house and makes life miserable for the people that are living next to them, in spite of any kind of rules or regulations we could enact. I think it's absolutely crucial that we support people who want to rent their homes, because tourists become renters, become owners. And for our own well-being and for our own survival as a community, we need those those owners to come into this community. And the people renting their homes deserve that kind of income. So I think we just have to braille our way through it, just 1 inch at a time, trying to figure out what's the way to be the most respectful for the maximum number of people, and recognize that sometimes we'll succeed and sometimes we'll fail.
Michael, thank you, David. Michael, the short-term rental task force, I believe that's the name that it's going by currently, has just embarked on their study of this issue just very recently, and I'm not aware that they've actually made much headway at this point. Is that the way to go with this? Recognizing that we're a very collaborative type of community, we take time to look at a lot of points of view. At the same time, we've had a lot of residents who have felt that this has been a problem for quite a while, and they feel like they'd like to see some action sooner rather than later. How does the task force fit in? Is that the way to go?
Well, the task force has had at least one open meeting with the members, which I was really impressed by. But let me come back to that meeting in a second. I think the process is really important. One of the things that has impressed me around this community has been our willingness, if you will, as a governance structure, the board and its committees, to really keep sunshine on almost every single thing that we do. And my very favorite example would be pickleball, which I have now decided is a verb, to pickleball something. But to pickleball something is to hold enough meetings so everyone feels heard, and everyone understands that their opinion matters. It doesn't necessarily mean in a democracy that you get everything you want, but I think it's extremely important for people to understand that this is not a community that makes decisions on the basis of what 2 or 3 people want, but makes decisions on what the members care about. So I think the task force is the right way to do it. The thing that impressed me about the meeting is I did not hear anyone attacking anyone else. What I heard over and over again were people wanted the quiet enjoyment of this place. And I would suggest that the issue around short-term rentals is a very small number of bad actors. I would suggest that the vast number of renters, most of us never notice because they are basically the same as the people that live here full time. They're respectful, they're enjoyable, and in fact, as both of my colleagues here said, we want them to come here and we want them to become our neighbors. So the real question is, how do you deal with the bad actors? And I think there can be some better guidelines for maximum number of people in a home. Ultimately, the owners are the people that are responsible, not the rental agencies. And I think the task force is going to wrestle with that challenge of how do we maintain this wonderful balance we have while enforcing the rules in a good enough way that the bad actors become fewer and fewer over time.
Roland or David, anything to add to that or counter there?
I totally agree. I would say that in some cases, even if every renter is fairly well behaved, still, if you have a house where there are 100 different groups cycling through in a year, it's somewhat wearing on the community. It's just a different kind of land use, but otherwise totally agree.
And the other thing I want to remind everyone is that our security force is not an enforcement force. It's not there to, send people home. That's the job of the sheriff. So our community, our security force is just to make sure that we are all here in a safe way. And safety is their primary concern, not enforcement. So they can make suggestions, they can intervene to a degree, but they're not going to be the teeth behind any kind of regulations.
Thanks from each of you. Let's turn our attention for a minute to forest management. As we all know, we've spent the last 2 years, maybe longer.
5.
Longer. Formally looking at forest management issues here, and of course a task force was formed around that, which did a tremendous amount of study, analysis, exploring options, and in the fairly recent future, came out with a set of recommendations, which was forwarded to the board. And my question to each of you, and David, we'll start with you on this one. What are your feelings about those recommendations? Well, I think you were part of the Forest Task Force, but that's okay. What are your thoughts on those recommendations? Are they ready to go? Does the board need to do more? Were all the issues addressed, or is further study noted, or did we end up with anything useful at all, or is it exactly what we need?
I am incredibly proud of the work that the Forest Task Force did. I think it embodies Sea Ranch at its best, which is a bunch of citizen scientists bringing in experts to look at a situation that we all care about, making some hours and hours of incredible research, days of incredible research, both in the forests and in doing research on the side, and bringing our research to each other in order to find what is the optimum solution for creating a healthy forest. In many regards, we continually were amused, because what we discovered as oftentimes the optimum solution was the solution that was currently in place. The Sea Ranch has had a very intelligent relationship with their forests, and that relationship allowed us to live in a very healthy forested environment. Every expert that comes up here is delighted at how healthy our forest is, and some of them want to use our forests as examples to help other forests become more healthy. So I think the recommendations that they are making are going to be challenging for the board. The board needs to decide where we go from here in relationship to this forest. There are some really fascinating ideas about carbon sequestration that are in that report that I think could provide some income for the association, as well as preserve our forest for a long-term period of time, which I think have come out of that kind of research. And I'm really proud of our community as a whole, from going from a time 5.5, 6 years ago where we were in acrimonious discord and conflict around what to do with the forests, through a tremendous number of public meetings and public outreach to the Sea Ranch community, and to get to this place of a very high level of 100% agreement and accord. The board unanimously approved these recommendations. So I think we all should be proud of it.
Good. Roland, would you echo that, or do you have some other thoughts?
Pretty much just echoing, wholeheartedly agree with the recommendations. Great thanks to Maggie Crosby and Linda Lipkin for their non-board member contributions, which were extensive, and Maggie for coming up with the carbon sequestration revenue idea, which I think we really should pursue. Certainly a more ecologically friendly way of generating some revenue. And, I even think it's worth revisiting Rule 7.3, I think it was, David, maybe make it a little harder for future boards to rediscover the idea of logging. That's my personal sentiment.
Okay. Michael, what are your thoughts there, particularly on Rule 7.3? And then I'd also like you to sort of address, we didn't jump into it, but the dead and dying trees, which we've heard a lot about in the last year, and a lot of study has been done there, and we've all realized that that's potentially a lot of money to deal with our dead and dying trees. Talk about some of those issues.
Yeah, I think that adds another dimension to the forest management that sadly has become more apparent since the bulk of that work was done. And I think the work is spot on. It's really a matter now of executing aggressively around it. I think the wildfires and the dead and dying trees raise two very important issues for us. One is there needs to be a different kind of active forest management along the margin where we're seeing this kind of tree death. And it is complex and it is expensive, but I think it's something we need to address as a community for our own health as much as for the forest. We are interdependent with that forest. The other is it may be time to rethink how we deal with protected space around homes and the rules around, especially for the people that live above the timberline here, about what are materials that are appropriate, and then also what's an appropriate clearing area around the homes. We haven't really adapted a lot of those rules. This comes a little bit into design review. And I think we need to do some aggressive rethinking about what it means to be a safe and sustainable community in light of the changes we're facing.
Thank you. David or Roland, care to add or subtract anything from that or comment on each other here?
Well, the one thing I want to say in terms of dead and dying trees is the association has done a lot and will continue to do some, not quite in the dramatic fashion that it did in the first year that it took that project on. But the biggest problem that we face in the dead and dying tree issue is the private ownership of those dead and dying trees. And that is a very knotty problem, because there's all kinds of legal challenges that we face in terms of getting some of that dead wood managed. And I don't know how we're going to negotiate our way through that. That's one of those thorny problems that the board is going to face coming up in the next few years.
Let me reiterate that. So the dead and dying trees that are on our commons, we as an association can direct our money and our dollars to handle those in some fashion, although there's thousands of them and we can't deal with them all in 1 year.
Right.
But what you're saying is that some portion of the dead and dying trees, maybe a lot, are on individual lots, and therefore are the responsibility of the owner of that lot, and any removal of trees, that cost is going to be borne by the owner. And we don't.
The further south you go, the more those trees are under private ownerships.
Okay. Thank you. Roland, anything you want to add there?
I would if I knew what fraction of the total trees. There are 750,000, I think, conifers were planted during the original development and outside the forest, right? And David, do you know what fraction are on private land?
It would be really hard to establish that, because there's a lot of commons in the middle of the Sea Ranch, and there's some commons in the northern part of the Sea Ranch. But the further down you get towards the lodge, the more all that forested area is under private ownership.
Okay. Thanks. Let's move to another question. This was submitted to me by a member, which I was happy to see a couple of days ago. And here's the question. It's about the airstrip, about our airstrip. Recognizing that several members This was how it was sent to me. Recognizing that several members have committed to living at the Sea Ranch based at least partially on the presence of the airstrip, how important is the airstrip compared to other community facilities? How committed are you to sustaining the airstrip as safe and consistent access for members or emergency aircraft? Roland, you want to tackle that one?
I was, when I was flying, an instrument-rated pilot, and I know how much fun it is to have a private airport where you happen to want one. And I also think that facilities in homeowners associations carry with them sort of an implicit promise to continue, not to just suddenly let them vanish. And of course, emergency aircraft, certainly a helicopter pad of some sort up there, I don't think that should ever go away. I think probably the motivation, if I could guess, of the question had less to do with the small expense of maintaining the grass and the landing strip than it did the possibilities that if we do want to commit to some ambitious infrastructure project later, like a solar farm, it has to go somewhere, and we don't want to cut down 30 or 40 acres of forest. So, there it is. There's the landing strip and its environs. And if that's the motivation, then I'd say that I would certainly not rule that out. I think there'd have to be a strong consensus that we really wanted that, really wanted that project. And then, the people that were pilots and had counted on that, well, that would be tough. That would be tough for them.
Okay. David, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's one of the points that Roland made is really important to underline, which is we do not support the facilities on the ranch based on the amount that they're used. We support the facilities on the ranch so that the wide continuum of members can find a number of different facilities that support their interests and lifestyles. And so I am absolutely 100% strongly committed to that airstrip, even though it's used by a bit small group of people. In the same way I'm committed to the stables, even though it's used by a small group of people. In the same way I'm committed to the library, even though it's used by a small group of people. So I think that there's something, it's important for a board member to remember that that this isn't like a town where you have a limited number of tax dollars and you have to find the most effective use for this. It's a community development, and we need to support all members of the association, not just the most members of the association.
Thanks. Michael, got a comment here?
Oh, yeah. It is a hair-raising approach sometimes. Actually, it's a more hair-raising takeoff, or if you're landing from the north, it's a hair-raising approach. Look, I think it's important that we maintain it for the reasons that both the other candidates mentioned, but I think the reality is, a year and a half ago, we were cut off entirely, all three directions, we were cut off. That airstrip is an astonishing asset for this community, and it is a relatively inexpensive asset to maintain. And I think if we want to think of ourselves as a resilient community, it's a blessing that we have that. And I agree that we want to be able to maintain all the amenities as we can for the community. There does need at some point to be an understanding that everything costs money. And at some point, a lot of the infrastructures that we have on the ranch are going to require investment for renewal and maintenance. So I think the board will be faced with some hard decisions, and hopefully we won't be forced to make trade-offs. But I think losing the airport would be not just disappointing for a few people that are capable of flying in, but damaging to the community as a whole in terms of what we want to be able to maintain in terms of safety and security.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's shift again back to a topic that a couple of you mentioned earlier. We've all been living through now, we've been sheltering in place for 2+ weeks here with the coronavirus situation. What do you think about how the association has interacted with members on the coronavirus issue? There's a lot of separate sub-issues that go along with that. Has the communication been effective? Do you see, are there other ways that our association and our members can interact with each other in what I think we would rightfully call a disaster time? Any thoughts here? Mike, yeah, go ahead, Michael.
If I might.
Yeah.
You know, there's a saying in disaster communications or crisis communications, the difference between a crisis and a disaster is the communications of the leadership in the first few days. And I think the world of our current board and our management, but I think they could have done a lot more. I really believe that a lot of the concerns that people have about outsiders, et cetera, have been born out of fear and anxiety, and that all of us have that fear and anxiety right now. That we could go through a whole laundry list of why the conditions internally, medically, et cetera, are upsetting. But we did not receive real clear communications as a community about here are the things you really ought to do to protect yourself. We were pointed to other resources, but we really could have had a slightly stronger communication and a drumbeat that said a few things. One is, here's sort of the really authoritative source, and remind people over and over. These are the things that we need to do for our neighbors. And if you know people that have needs, et cetera, and here's the reasons why it's important to be continuing to shelter in place. We have relatively limited communications channels at the ranch, but I think we could have done a better job of getting everyone aligned with this and giving people better tools. I think that would have made people less fearful, and I think it would have enabled us to operate better as a community. So, you know, going forward, I hope this is something that we can really rectify, where we really take a more active role in this. We have a crisis and disaster operations capability here. We didn't formalize and stand it up. And we basically expected the county, the state, and the federal government to do that for us. I think we had a responsibility to do a little bit more.
Respond to that, either David or Roland. Let me reiterate what I think you're saying, Michael. You're saying that the response, our own response here in this community, was not as rapid or authoritative as it could have been. Another point of view is that none of us have faced anything like this. You know, crisis management is, you know, generally when you're on someone's board, you're not really set up to think about that. Although every organization should, but we didn't. So now the question is what you know, where do we do from here? You know, let's just, hypothetically, let's just say Corona is back next winter, which we don't know if that could happen or not. What should this board and our community be doing now to make it, you know, to make it better? If this virus comes back, or we have yet some other issue, and we will have other issues, be it wildfires, earthquakes, you know, we're going to have issues in the future.
Yeah, the good news is we don't have to worry about whether issues are going to come down the pike. I think with climate change and everything else that's going on, they will be coming down the pike. And Michael, I'm glad you said what you said, because I think one of the things that I think Frank has excelled in is creating a strong association-oriented leadership style, and the association is in good shape through this whole process. But I think at times that's been at the expense of his connection with the membership as a whole. And that hole is a hole that potentially could have been filled with by the board, and it wasn't. And so there was a vacuum for a period of time where Frank was making the kinds of decisions he needed to make to protect the association, which is really important. but not making the connection with the membership that I think was needed for all of us in this time of crisis. Sort of the heart connection as well as the information connection that we needed. So I would say that what we need to do in the future is, first of all, make sure the community manager has really strong membership relationship skills to go along with the kinds of management skills that we've had running this organization for years, as long as Frank's been here. And the other thing is that the board needs to take a look at what is its role in a crisis, because I think it deferred to the community manager, and I don't think it should be in opposition to the community manager, but I think in association with the community manager, and this is one of my pet peeves, we need to have a more direct relationship in virtual media to the membership, so that members that live here, members that live locally, and members that live far away from here have a way of directly connecting to a source of information that isn't the buzz or the listserv or something like that, but is a direct communication source. Frank has been careful about using that info alerts email because he hasn't wanted to swamp us, but this was a period of time where we actually needed to use it much more aggressively in terms of helping us through this crisis. And that we need to create other lines of media connection with people, the members of the association.
Roland, what do you think?
I guess I'm a little bit more lenient on the board. I think they had this bind of responsibility versus authority, and to Michael's point, they didn't have him. They didn't have a break glass in case of emergency phone book that said, here are your experts for a coronavirus outbreak. This it's totally caught us by surprise. And I think one thing that we could do going forward is have such a phone book, have local experts that have some personal relationships or established credibility and trust in the community, and they advise the board in these different areas. Very few things move as quickly in terms of disasters, right? Well, except for earthquake. But I think part of the review of this whole postmortem of this whole period in our history, will be, well, what's our overall preparedness for disaster type A, B, C, and D? And I think having a phone book of experts, local experts, would really help.
George, could I make one quick comment?
Yes, please.
Please. So this is part of what I do with my life now, and with respect, Roland, I think we went through the H1N1 event in 2009, and we developed a set of scenarios and knowledge and capability. And both at the federal level and locally, we basically threw it all away. So we do know how to respond to disasters. And there are scripts and there are ways of doing it. And I firmly believe that every community should see it as their responsibility to develop those capabilities locally, and not just to defer to a larger geography for it. So as a quick example, we do have the text alert system, which is probably the largest way of connecting with everybody, the phone text alert. We could have set up community phone calls.
And the text alert system is run by each county in California, is that correct?
Yeah, but we also have our own at Sea Ranch.
Oh, correct, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And we could have actually gone out and alerted the members, set up a community set of phone calls or other kinds of meetings. And I really believe we do know enough. And I think Roland's right. We should have a playbook of resources and experts, et cetera, so that as a community, we feel more protected. And when you feel more protected, you are much more hospitable to your neighbors and to strangers, et cetera. And I think we could have done that. It's one of the things that I would hope we would aggressively move toward.
Excellent. Anyone care to add to that? Good, good. Well, I'd like to give you each a few moments now to make some concluding statements. Once again, our Sea Ranchers have heard some of your thoughts on some key issues. Give us your concluding thoughts. If there's any other issues that we haven't brought up today, feel free to add those into your thoughts and comments, and let us know why why Sea Ranchers should consider you as a board member. David, go ahead.
I think anyone that has watched this show has been impressed by all three of the candidates. I'd vote for the other two folks in the snap if I wasn't running, because I think that they all show a deep understanding of the ranch, and they all bring a different level of expertise to the table. So I think whoever wins this election, the board is going to be in good shape having these new faces or an old face back on the board. I want to say that I think perhaps the thing that I'm bringing and holding dear to my heart that I want to see happen on this board is not only for the new community manager, but even more importantly for the new homeowners here on the board, the people that are going to be buying houses in the next 3 years here. Because I'm friends with some people that are buying houses and building houses on the ranch, and I see how irregular was their process of understanding what the ranch was about. They came up here because it was beautiful and they wanted to live in this beautiful place, and they had no idea that it's not only one of the most beautiful spots on earth, but also it has one of the most beautiful philosophies of life on earth. And I want to make sure that they get many different forms of introduction to that philosophy, as well as having the community manager get many different forms of introduction to that philosophy, so they can see the magic of Sea Ranch, not just the beauty of it. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Roland?
I had prepared a few remarks, and they're so close to David's sentiments. I won't read them, but there is this spiritual aspect to this place, and I think it's based on this incredible sensory experience that you get when you go out and you take a walk and you feel nature and not a lot of human disturbance. I think that's what binds us together, and some kind of reaffirmation, sharing of that, maybe even building a message that would be part of our branding for social media and external communications. It's worth it spiritually, financially, and for our future.
Michael?
Well, I'll be lazy and echo what my other two candidates said, all of it, and respect them as well a lot. It's an honor to be running with you. I don't see it as running against each other, right? The one thing I would say is we've been really fortunate to inherit a legacy of some passionate people 60, 55 years ago, and a physical environment that was really forgiving. And I think we need to move with a degree of intentionality. The Forest Task Force is a perfect example. Some of the environmental work that we're finally beginning to look at. I think we need to be conscious about the fact is we can't just live here. We have to become much more active stewards of a unique asset. So my hope is that my son will come back to this place in 40 years and say, darn, wow, they did a great job. This was amazing. And it won't happen on autopilot. I think we really, and this is, I think, a key responsibility for the board, we really have to think about what do we have to do to actively steward it with as light a touch as possible so that nature can do what nature does best. But we as humans need to see what we can do to help maintain the treasure that this place is.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the Sea Ranchers who are now watching this, or in our time, they'll be watching it in the next upcoming days. I do want to reiterate the point that was made earlier, that it's essential that you take your ballot and vote. We've got to have a certain number of homeowners to achieve a quorum. If we don't have a quorum under California law, we have to conduct the entire election again, which costs us all money. So it's a lot better for us if we just do it right the first time. So once again, here are our candidates for the 2020 Sea Ranch Board. We've got David Skibbins. David, there we go. We got Michael Kleeman. Michael. and Roland Stoughton. Roland, thank each one of you for taking this time right now and speaking to our Sea Ranch owners. With that, we're going to tell everyone stay safe, stay healthy, stay at home, and be sure and vote. Thanks a bunch. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Sure.